clients. I want to make sure I'm using things on that are natural, but that are also have a lot of efficacy to them that actually work. And they said, well, have you ever used CBD? And at the time, I thought it was illegal for me to use CBD on my clients. Come to find out, that's not necessarily true. So I found myself in a world of, like, as a medical professional, what can I use on my clients that will help with pain, that's non-psychoactive maybe, and I can use it legally in my practice. And Chris introduced me to Tim. And that's a rock star you got to get to know if we want to say thank you for having adult use in Ohio. I think that one of the gentlemen, like more than one person, the gentleman and his wife sitting on that sofa, they need kudos. All right, and Tim invited me to an event. And I met Lenny, and I met Joe, and I met some other fabulous people who were giving me great information. I'm like, well, as a medical professional, I don't know this. I know my family doesn't know this. I know our friends don't know this. So how do we get people to understand? So I walked in here one day and said, hey, Joe, what would you think about having a little collaboration and a network meeting and an educational seminar and a tasting all in one night? He's like, let's do it. So within 20-30 minutes, we put this whole thing together, and I just want to say, Joe, thank you so much for hosting us tonight. For the raffle stuff, that was far and above what we had talked about in the tasting, and thank you to your staff. We appreciate you. So tonight is a lot about information and misinformation, and I want you to walk away with an answer to a question that maybe you didn't have before, or setting the record straight, if you will, okay? So no matter where you're coming from in this industry, whether you're a CBD user, a THC user, a cannabis user, recreational, medical, we need it all in order to have all of the different things that we want to accomplish within this industry done correctly. So I'm going to introduce you to Joe. This is Joe Brennan. He is the owner of Columbus Botanical Depot, and I'm going to, instead of telling his story, which I could not do justice, Joe, I'm going to let you tell your story, and then he's going to walk you through sort of the world of CBD and THC and cannabis and hemp. All right. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Okay.
So thank you all for coming. We're going to learn quite a few interesting things tonight. About 10 years ago now, back in 2013, I lost my dad, who was 61 years old, and then my uncle, who was 52 years old, all within about a 6-month time span of each other, due to pharmaceuticals, due to my uncle had lung cancer. He was taking chemo. The doctor said this last round of pill chemo will probably be the one that does him in, and turns out it did. I sat at his bedside and watched him pass away. 3 months before that, my dad was 61, and he was on pharmaceuticals for 15 years from cutting his arm. He was disabled from that, and they put him on methadone and Percocet and literally amitriptyline and all these different narcotics that over 15 years literally shut his liver and kidneys down. He called me one day and said, Joe, I'm dying. And I said, well, will you try cannabis? And back then I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about the endocannabinoid system. I knew nothing about CBD. Nobody did. It was 2013. And so, actually 2012 when he started passing away. And so that happened. And I'm sitting at home devastated. I'm flipping through the news, just lost my dad, just lost my uncle. They're the pinnacles of our family. Uncle Tim did the cooking, my dad did the aggravating. And so they were gone, so I'm sitting there flipping through the news one night, and I come across what looked like a kid having a seizure on the ground, and the mom putting something under the tongue, and I went back and found that, and sure enough, it was the CNN special called Weed One, where Sanjay Gupta went out to Colorado, and they discovered CBD treating kids with seizures. Charlotte Figge, they created a brand called Charlotte's Web over this, and I'm sitting there watching Sanjay Gupta, and the mom put that oil under the tongue, and this little girl come out of a seizure in 30 seconds, and cognitive again. So something just came over me and said, you couldn't help your family, but you're going to go help the world starting right this second. And so at the time I was doing real estate, flipping houses, had rentals and all that kind of stuff, and I just kind of cold turkeyed that. and just took the 16 grand my dad left me for dying. He said, Joe, if you want to do something good in this life, go help somebody else. I said, well, now that you're dead, I think I'll listen to you now. I'll take the money you left me for dying, and I went and bought $20,000 worth of Plus CBD sprays. And for the next 3 years, I went around Ohio and surrounding states just giving them away to every old man and every old lady and everybody I saw in pain or that looked like they could benefit. I'd go right up and say, you ever hear of CBD? And they're like, no, of course, nobody had 2013, 2014, 2015. And they would let me spray oil under their tongue, pre-COVID, right? And they didn't know me from Adam. And I'd go right up and say, here, let me give you a couple sprays on your tongue. The little old ladies, they'd say, okay, and I'd spray the oil under their tongue. And I'd be standing there talking to them. Within minutes, they'd say, I think I feel better. I think that, is this placebo? And so that just happened over and over and over until I finally realized that this is not placebo. This is not a fad. This isn't a health food kick that's going to come and go. There's something to this. So I decided that I got to be educated. Otherwise, I'm a snake oil salesman, because cannabis, they say, cures everything. Well, how? And so I said, well, I have to be educated now. So I went to school, learned the endocannabinoid system, learned physiology, and just literally delved the rest of my life into CBD education, endocannabinoid education. I stayed up till 3 in the morning watching YouTube videos. Dr. Ethan Russo, Mara Gordon, Ralph Meshulam, all the leaders of this industry that are not pseudoscience, the real science people, not the guys in their garage on YouTube, but the doctors that are actually explaining how this works. So after I discovered that, I realized that this is the biggest health discovery in human history, that the discovery of the endocannabinoid system could and will save more lives than all of medicine and surgery combined. The leading neuroscientist said that a couple years ago, the world's leading neuroscientist, so that's not just my statement. So I began to dive into the endocannabinoid system and soon discovered that it controls everything. Every physiological function of the human body is controlled by the endocannabinoid system. Basically what it is your body's full of receptors, CB1, Cannabis 1, and Cannabis 2 receptor. And when they're activated with cannabinoids that come from the cannabis plant, they're chemicals that come from cannabis that bind to these receptors, that is like turning the circuit breaker on the receptors that allow signals to bridge across the synaptic gap, which we'll look at in a couple minutes. But really, it's kind of like turning the circuit breaker on your cells. Our body has over 70 trillion cells. They all got to communicate. Where's the Wi-Fi? What's keeping everything in communication? Turns out the endocannabinoid system. It's a hardwired, kind of like mycelium is in the soil. We have mycelium-like structures called the endocannabinoid system that are all wired together through receptors. And it's like, once they're activated, the phone rings in the immune system, and then the pancreas is calling the immune system, says, hello, we haven't spoken 20 years. That's a problem. So it's all about the communication within our body, and that's what this system does. So, the endogenous cannabinoid system, that's what Endo stands for endogenous, means self-produced or from within. We produce cannabis every single day. It's very interesting. We also have phytocannabinoids. Those are from a plant. Phyto from the plant, endo from within. So we make our own cannabis every time we exercise. That's what runner's high is. You heard of runner's high before? When you exercise, your body produces anandamide, which is our body's own form of THC, which goes up and activates the CB1 receptor in the brain and makes us feel that kind of cool, calm, relaxed feeling that we get when we get that runner's high. When we eat omega-3 fatty acids, our body makes cannabis. They prescribe fish oil for depression. Why? Because our body takes fish oil, omega-3 fats, converts it into anandamide and 2-AG again, our body's own THC and kind of like CBD, which makes our body produce more. If we have the receptors, that means we have to produce it, right? So the third way is when a woman's pregnant. When a woman's pregnant, she probably failed drug tests. Not because she ever touched cannabis, but because her body's producing so much endogenous cannabinoids. Why? Because when when they go to breastfeed and the baby drinks the mother's milk, full of cannabis, by the way, endogenous cannabinoids, it goes in and activates the baby's brand new endocannabinoid system, speeding up the process of neurogenesis and all these things connecting as one. The goal of the endocannabinoid system is to promote homeostasis, which is balance. Everything's in balance. If your neurochemistry is out of balance, CBD comes in and baselines it. And so it's very interesting the way it works. So, our body makes THC, it's called anandamide. Anandamide is actually a Sanskrit word for bliss. You ever hear when you eat chocolate, if there's like a bliss thing happening there? Somehow chocolate interacts with our endocannabinoid system too. It causes anandamide to go to the receptor. So 2-AG, 2-arachidonyl is the molecule that binds to our CB2 receptors. So CB1 receptors are neck up, CB2 receptors are neck down. So if you have neurological stress, sleep, anxiety, depression, anything like that, neck up, you want to focus on the cannabis 1 receptor, and we'll talk about how to do that. If you have body aches and pains, autoimmune disorders or something like that, you want to focus on the CB2 receptor, which is in the immune system, which 80% of that is in the gut. So when you take capsules, gummies, they go down and activate the CB2 receptor. So there's a couple different ways we can do it. And so you've got these different cannabinoids that plants produce, and then of course you've just got the 2 cannabinoids that our bodies produce. And so that's what we've got going on there, and we've got these receptors that activate. So this is a good way to look at the endocannabinoid system. We've got all these systems in the body, right? Circulatory, central nervous system, digestive system, endocrine system, all these systems, kind of like a car. Your car has a transmission system, it has a braking system, it has an engine system, it has all these systems. Well, what keeps all of the systems in communication in your car? Turns out the ECU, the electronic control unit. It's the brain box of your car that keeps all the systems communicating to promote homeostasis or balance, everything working as one. That is essentially what our endocannabinoid system does, but it does it because it's hardwired throughout all of our other systems. So it's that centralized communicatory system that keeps everything in communication. You pull the brain box out of your car, you ain't driving nowhere. You disrupt the endocannabinoid system, the body goes haywire. And they call that autoimmune disorder because they can't figure out what it is. Turns out it's clinical endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. So the system is involved in everything. It's keeping it all communicating with each other through these receptors. And so we discovered this stuff back in the early 90s. They discovered the endocannabinoid system in the early 80s. So this isn't real long, this is kind of new, relatively speaking. And so it's literally changing the face of medicine and the way we deal with medicine these days, and how we deal with physiology and getting our bodies back into homeostasis, because we're so far away from that. And so we kind of covered all this stuff, but as you can see here, the adrenals, the ovaries, the uterus, the prostate, the testes, the thyroid, the brain, and everything associated with the brain, the lymphatic system, the heart, the gastro, the bones. There's CB2 receptors in our bones. It's all about getting the cannabinoid to the receptor, though. We'll talk about that in a minute. So it's everywhere. CB1 receptors, neck up. CB2 receptors, kind of neck down. So your skin, your liver, your organs, your gut, your connective tissue, your eyes, your bones, your skeleton, your adipose tissue, your pancreas, all that stuff is CB2 receptor. Literally everywhere. When you look at these receptors, they have these, I think they're EKGs, where they can look at the human body and it shows up in red where the receptors are. The entire body is completely filled with these cannabis receptors. Completely filled. The brain, there are more cannabinoid receptors in the brain than all neurotransmitters combined. It's a pretty big statement. Googleable too. And so they're literally everywhere. And the way it kind of works is endogenous or exogenous from the plant will come in and make their pathway through the calcium channels. This one's a little sciencey, we won't go too deep into it. But basically, our endocannabinoids are that anandamide and 2-AG. They go down through the calcium channel and they bind to these receptors. Phytocannabinoids do it from plants the same way our body does. And so basically, it kind of just shows how they go in and how they metabolize. FAW production is kind of the metabolism of it. Kind of like with cannabis, when you use it, you get about 4 hours out of it. You got to use it again because your body's metabolizing that, and that's what that FAW production is. And so again, literally everywhere. They all kind of cross, you know, there are, I say CB1 is neck up, CB2 is neck down. That's a general kind of speaking thing. There are CB1 receptors in some organs in men, and there's CB2 receptors. So they're kind of all intertwined, but it's primarily CB1 neck up, CB2 neck down. And that just gives you an idea of what receptor do we target for what disease or what ailment. There's how it works on the postsynaptus and the presynaptic. This is very interesting. This is how it works for seizures. So seizures are a misfiring of the brain. The neurotransmitters are just going crazy and they just can't communicate with each other. It's like I'm trying to call you, but you're never answering the phone. And actually I'm getting that weird, nasty tone on the other line that you don't want to hear. That's exactly what's going on. Well, what happens is, a lot of times that's due to the body not producing enough endogenous cannabinoids. A lot of times seizures is an endocannabinoid deficiency, meaning the body's not producing enough cannabinoids to promote this balance. And that's where cannabis comes in and works so well for kids with seizures and people with seizures, is because what it does, as soon as you put that oil under the tongue, it floats through the bloodstream, it immediately crosses blood-brain barrier and hits those CB1 receptors in the brain within 30 seconds, usually restoring neurogenesis or restoring normal brain function. When you see them kids having seizures, it's usually 30 seconds to a minute that they come out of a seizure from CBD oil. And that just shows you how fast it gets into the bloodstream, hits that CB1 receptor, and restores normalcy in the brain. That is amazing. And the way it does that is the cannabinoid comes in. So neurotransmitters, they're kind of like a signal sent from the central nervous system. It bridges across this gap called the synaptus gap, and then the signal goes on down the chain. It's kind of like me calling you and how you answer the phone and how we get the message across. Well, there just so happens to be a cannabinoid receptor on both sides of this synaptus, right in the middle too. There's a cannabinoid receptor on both sides. So when the central nervous system sending signals and it's not bridging across, that's the perception of pain with fibro, MS, all these other different issues. As soon as people put the oil under the tongue, it binds to the receptors, it floats down, the CBD floats down the bloodstream, binds perfectly to these receptors like a key to a lock, and literally allows the signal to bridge across the gap. It's almost like the circuit breaker of the cell. Because the signal is electric, we're all electric, everything's electrical impulses. And so it's kind of like the circuit breaker. Because when the electrical impulse isn't bridging across, it's not getting a connection, the light bulb doesn't come on. So as soon as the receptor gets activated, the signal bridges across, the central nervous system doesn't have to send it 100,000 more times per second, the perception of pain goes away. So interesting, so interesting. So it literally allows the signal to bridge across. There it is again. So we've got our CB1s, our CB2s. Trip receptors are kind of like the receptors that turmeric and other things kind of act on. Cannabinoids can act on these receptors too, indirectly and directly. And so those are other ways that cannabinoids can help with pain and stuff like that. So again, you got your phytocannabinoids from plants. You got your endocannabinoids from the human body. Dogs make it, animals. This is interesting. All mammals have an endocannabinoid system. Our dogs, our cats, reptiles, birds, fish, except for insects. Except for one insect. Guess what insect has an endocannabinoid system?
Bees.
You would think that, but the bees that take the THC in California to make the bee honey, they're not flying around stoned.
That's very true.
Because they don't have the receptors, right? But guess what? Spiders. The worst of them all. Somehow they have an endogenous cannabinoid system. They did a test where they blew smoke on the spider and it started making like lazy webs. So all mammals have this endogenous cannabinoid system. That is what is so, so interesting. Our cats, our dogs all benefit from this stuff, and they deal with the same stuff too. They have a central nervous system too, don't they? Any species with a central nervous system by default must have an endogenous cannabinoid system. That's how they kept looking for it. They're like, wait a minute. If humans have it with a central nervous system, let's look at all the other species that have CNS as well. Turns out they have an ECS as well. You've got to have the brain box of the car or you're not going nowhere. The cars come out of the factory with the brain box in them. So do we. We just have to support our endocannabinoid system with cannabinoids so that we keep this brain box going so we can continue to go from A to B. Okay, so basically that's the science on it. I have a really awesome video I want to show you guys. It's 12 minutes, but it goes by like that because it keeps you hyped. This is a great video we're going to watch. And then we're going to do a little question and answers things if you guys have any questions. So enjoy. This is good.
Hello, Portland! Can you guys hear me? Hello, and hello everyone streaming. I know a few of you. Have you had your coffee? Are you ready? All right, good. So since you're already settled in your seats, I want you to lean in. Because today, I get to tell you a secret. It's a secret that's been well kept for almost 30 years. And I want to start by sharing with you a quick story about a revolutionary named Jill. So let's watch.
Hello, my name's Jill, and I have Parkinson's disease. I'm taking my Parkinson's prescription medication this morning, and this is how it helps, and it doesn't. This is my oil, cannabis oil, and I'm just gonna spread it on the biscuit like that. It's been 20 minutes since I've had that butter and the biscuit, and I feel wonderful. No shakes, no butter.
So stock up on signage, because right now at Vistaprint, all signs are 20% off, so you can bring in business with dirt.
We're all happy Jill got better, right? But you're probably wondering, how is that possible? How is it possible that her well-researched, FDA-approved drugs aren't working for her, but something else is? It's because there's a secret system in your body that no one is talking about. Now we know these systems really well, right? They're taught in every health, anatomy, and physiology class between elementary and high school and medical school. You guys know these? Yeah, we have our circulatory and our pulmonary systems, our skeletal and muscular systems, just to name a few. And we all know about our nervous system, which we once thought controlled them all. But today I'm going to talk to you about this system. It's a system totally unlike, supreme to, and in control of all the rest. And it was completely left out of every single medical textbook I read, despite its discovery 27 years ago. Right? I am not making this up. This is for real. So since it's not in the textbook, I'm going to share it with you today. I'm going to share with you the real science and the real history of this system and how you can use it to take control of your health. But before I do, I want to share my story. So when I was a kid, I wanted to become a doctor like my parents. But as medical school approached and my parents reflected on the changing medical field, my mom encouraged me to do something different with medicine. So I pursued a dual degree in medicine and business to become a doctor entrepreneur, because we entrepreneurs believe we can change the world with our ideas, and I wanted to become a world-changing doctor. Can't you tell? Yes, with that notion, I was eager and energized to learn. But what I learned deflated me. Because for me, the salient lesson from medical and business school was that big medicine is a big bureaucracy, and paradoxical to health. It was a heavy, really weighty ethical dilemma that forced me to confront the dichotomy between wanting to become a healer but becoming a drug pusher. I was training into a system pretty blasé and disinterested in addressing the root cause of disease and driven by patent medicine. This is not what I signed up for. And I was this close, literally, from walking away from medicine. But I found a family medicine program with an integrated medicine track, and that provided me a lens into ancient healing practices. Now we benefit tremendously from the advancing technologies and innovations of today's medicine. But what I found was that people used to be great at healing themselves and others, in doing so with natural substances and simple practices, like herbs and acupuncture and yoga and meditation and more. This wasn't witchcraft or voodoo, right? It wasn't then and it's not today. These healers knew what worked and they had sound theories as to why. They just lacked the science. They lacked the biophysical model demonstrating how, and it was hidden in the secret system all along. Are you guys ready to know what it is? All right, so we're gonna start with a word clue. Can anybody pronounce this word? Okay, well, let's do it together. So for the benefit of the group, let's sound it out. Ready? Endocannabinoid. Endocannabinoid. Endocan. Louder, Portland. Endocannabinoid. Endocan. Masterful. Yes, thank you. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, this secret system is what's known as the endocannabinoid system, or ECS for short, so if I say that, you know what I mean. And now we get to really nerd out as I explain what it is and how it works. So the endocannabinoid system resides within all animals except the insect. It's a 600 million-year-old messenger and receptor system integral to homeostasis, or the management of balance within your body. From embryonic development to immunosurveillance, there is not a single function in your bodies that is not somehow influenced or modulated by the ECS. You can think of it as a switchboard, functioning in and across all physiologic processes and organs, acting and reacting to internal and external stimuli to direct, correct, and overall manage your health. Now, although a gross simplification, the endocannabinoid system can be broken down into 4 core components. First up, we have the cannabinoid receptors, like CB1 and CB2 and counting. Next, we have the ligands that bind to those receptors and initiate an action called endocannabinoids, or body-made cannabinoids, like anandamide and 2-AG. And we have the synthesizing enzymes that make these endocannabinoids on demand when they're needed, and the degradative enzymes that break them down after they're used. And it works through something called retrograde signaling. So illustrated in this diagram is the route of an endocannabinoid that's made in a postsynaptic neuron in response to neurotransmitter stimulation. It then travels backwards or retrograde across the synapse, where it binds to a cannabinoid receptor on the presynaptic membrane to initiate an action, in this case, blocking the release of neurotransmitter. So let me break it down a little bit simpler with an analogy. Yes. So let's say the endocannabinoid system is your dormitory or your apartment building, and your neighbor across the hall is making a lot of noise and they're getting really loud. You just walk across the hall and you politely ask them to turn the volume down. So you can imagine how important this function is when cells are sending signals of stress, pain, or inflammation. Like your noisy neighbor, these processes need to be checked. And it's through this mechanism that the endocannabinoid system checks these processes back into balance so that your body can relax, remember to eat, fall asleep, forget traumatic experiences, and protect itself along with a host of other mediating and restorative processes. The endocannabinoid system keeps your body in balance. Now, up to now, you guys probably thought the brain was the boss, right? We all did. But the brain's not the boss. The endocannabinoid system is. And we had it wrong. So with all that said, you guys might be confused why this really awesome system was kept secret for so long. Well, I'd say that it probably has something to do with the plant that they used to discover it. So back in the 80s, researchers wanted to know how THC worked. And THC is a plant-made cannabinoid, or phytocannabinoid, found in cannabis. And it's responsible for the intoxicating and euphorogenic properties that cannabis is so infamous for. And using radio-tagged THC, the endocannabinoid system was discovered as THC locked into and unveiled this extensive receptor network concentrated throughout the brain and throughout the rest of the body. And THC did this because they found out it's a direct analog or mimicker of our own endocannabinoid, anandamide. And as an aside, anandamide, also known as the bliss molecule, is what's really responsible for the runner's high, not endorphins, right? So if any of you have ever experienced the euphoria that's come with exercising, that's your endocannabinoid system, that's anandamide. And we're finding more each day about over 100 other phytocannabinoids found in cannabis and other plants that mimic our endocannabinoids and have the potential to supplement or modulate the endocannabinoid system in therapeutic and healing ways. So this is where we're at. We have this incredibly mind-blowing system, and we have this plant, y'all, a plant that works on this system in therapeutic and healing ways. So what I really hope you're wondering right now is what's wrong with that? All right, well, the answer lies within the annals of American medical history, starting with two guys who really wanted to sell a lot of prescription drugs. And in their heyday, at the turn of the 20th century, American medicine was based on homeopathy and herbal medicine, and naturopaths and chiropractors weren't getting down with patent drugs. So with the millions of dollars in their pocketbook, a document called the Flexner Report, and the full force of state governments, American medical training was consolidated and standardized in accordance with pharmaceutical drug science to the exclusion of holistic care practices, natural substances, and remedies, and natural cures.
No living being should ever eat processed food for every single meal of their life.
Sorry.
Good, real food is simple.
Pharmaceutical drugs that treat symptoms, easy to sell, and then holistic caring practices and unpatentable plant medicine like cannabis, fringe, quackery, and illegal. What's surprising the most is that U.S. physicians prescribed cannabis routinely to their patients well into the 20th century. Cannabis was once a top 3 most commonly prescribed medicines, dwindling out of use due to heavy taxation, the prosecution of the doctors who prescribed it, and finally, it being written out of the American Pharmacopoeia in 1942. You see, big business wrote my textbook. And I can only speculate that the endocannabinoid system was kept secret for so long because its science validated the use of unpatentable plant medicine like cannabis and other natural practices. But the pharmaceutical industry wasn't the only big business disrupting the once free market of health. We Americans spend multiples of billions of dollars annually on unhealthy and low-quality foods, in addition to the prescription drugs we reflexively depend upon, both of which are directly linked to endocannabinoid system dysfunction, which we now know is the precipitant to most chronic diseases. And as a result, Americans are getting sicker and sicker, riding round and round on a Ferris wheel of big interests that we pay to ride. That doesn't make any sense. We're outsourcing the responsibility of our health to the bigs, and they're cashing in at our expense. Staying on this ride is a losing battle. But this can be the path if we reimagine our future. And in this future, all we need is love. Yeah. But the type of love that I'm talking about is self-love. Because in the battle with the bigs, self-love is the revolution of one. Not until we start taking good care of ourselves do we opt out of the big business of disease. And the revolution of one is you choosing to live in balance, and the endocannabinoid system is your on-ramp. Now, as powerful and resilient as the endocannabinoid system is, it is not immune to aging or the assaults of modern living, like those unhealthy foods, chronic use of prescription drugs, environmental pollutants and toxins, emotional stress, and how all of those things interplay on our genetics. Now, I just listed the top 5 contributors to ECS dysfunction and disease, and they should be avoided. But caring for yourself and your endocannabinoid system requires a bit of understanding of what nurtures it and what restores it, and here are your tools. Eat real food because it provides the body with what it needs for healthy cells and the raw materials for building those endocannabinoids. Supplement with adaptogenic herbs and spices because they soothe and tone the endocannabinoid system, aiding in balance restoration. Detox, because it cleanses the body. It reduces inflammation and rids it of harmful toxins that abet endocannabinoid system dysfunction. Incorporate phytocannabinoids and cannabinoid practices. Phytocannabinoids like CBD and THC, when taken as whole plant cannabis, have shown helpful in diseases of endocannabinoid system dysfunction and wellness overall. And cannabinoid practices, I know that's another fancy word, like sleeping and exercise, yoga and meditation, deep breathing and prayer, soothe and tone the endocannabinoid system as though they were supplements themselves. And lastly, maintain healthy relationships. The effects of personal relationships across work, home, your social settings affect endocannabinoid system tone. And y'all create reasons to smile and hug often, because as it turns out, smiling and hugging, part and parcel with healthy relationships, triggers the release of your endocannabinoid anandamide, the bliss molecule. Now, as we're nearing the end of my talk, I know I've given you a mouthful of information and it might be a little overwhelming, but I really hoped it piqued your curiosity and maybe sparked some inspiration, as it did for me. And I and my family have been so compelled by the physiology of the endocannabinoid system and the care it requires that we're pioneering the nascent fields of endocannabinology and cannabinoid medicine with many other scientists and clinicians worldwide. This is our calling. And effecting systemic change with this system is what gets us up and going every morning, and we're not going to stop until this information is in the textbook. Are you with me, Portland? Right? I mean, this is life-changing information. Yes. So I encourage us all to learn from our past and reimagine our future with this system. Because the secret to balanced health resides in the science and total care of the endocannabinoid system. And I can tell you, like we tell our patients, that getting started is a lot simpler than you think. You just have to choose one. And you too can be a revolutionary, like Jill. Thank you.
All right, nice. Amazing. Yeah, so what do you guys think about that?
Awesome.
That's great. Well, does anybody have any questions or anything about anything at all, or?
So you like that?
Yeah. You know, it's a lot of information, especially if you're new to it. It's the system that controls all the systems. So it's in charge, it's the boss, and we need to help that system. We need to assist that system. You know, we assist our digestive system. We pop probiotics and prebiotics and all this stuff. You can't get, you know, it's everywhere now. We assist every other system but the endocannabinoid system, which is actually the most important system we should be assisting, as it turns out.
Can you take too much of CBD or THC or any phytocannabinoid? Do you think there's a lot of negative repercussions that will come along with that endocannabinoid system?
I don't think so,
Okay.
for a couple reasons. So we store cannabinoids in our adipose tissue or our fat tissue. That's why it takes 30 days. If you use cannabis, it takes 30 days to get it out of your system, right? Because it stores in our adipose tissue. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is that so our body draws it on call as needed, which is so interesting. So when we take in cannabis, our body's like, oh my goodness, exogenous cannabinoids in abundance. I don't have to exercise for 20 minutes on a treadmill while eating avocados, while pregnant, while meditating. You can't do that. So we need exogenous cannabinoids to come in and fill these over 70 trillion receptors that we have. So our body holds on to every little bit of cannabis it possibly can for dear life. For 30 days or more it tries to. Because there's gonna come a time where you're gonna be stressed out about something and your body's gonna go, oh wait, we need cannabinoids to activate CB1 to make us feel cool, calm, chill, relaxed. So it'll draw it from the fat tissue to activate that receptor. So the more we do it, the more stores up in our system. Now when it does become a bad thing, especially with THC, because THC binds to the receptor and it can actually overexcite the receptor, especially when there's no CBD present to modulate that. And so what can happen is the more THC you do all the time, the people that do dabs 24/7, they have to do 100 million dabs to feel maybe something.
Right.
They don't really know. And that's because most of the receptors pop back in.
Okay.
They're like, ooh, this is too much. We don't like this.
Yeah.
And so the receptors, all the 70 trillion receptors might drop down to 11 trillion. And that's why, so if you take a break, what happens is all those receptors start popping back out again. Like, oh, okay, we're not being overexcited. We're cool now.
Yeah.
Let's kind of see if this guy's going to take it easy. Before you know it, you got 70 trillion receptors again. And the next time you do just a tiny amount, it fills all those receptors. And that's why you feel higher,
Okay.
quote unquote.
Thank you.
So,
I think you just kind of answered this, but I was curious about how much the endocannabinoids are naturally in your system, and at what point does it drop below whatever level to get to the point where you think, oh man, I need to supplement that with
Right.
Vital.
So your body will tell you because it'll become diseased. They call that disease. And you just put those two things together. And so that's your body saying, ooh, we don't like this. We need some support in some way. Every human has measurable endocannabinoid tone. Is what they call that ECS tone. It's a measurable tone on a graph. You do a blood draw, and they can measure the anandamide and the 2-arachidonoglycerol and tell you if you are cannabinoid deficient or if you are cannabinoid efficient. And so most people that are diseased have a very low measurable low endocannabinoid tone. And so that tells you right there, as soon as those patients start putting cannabinoids in the body, their ECS tone starts to come back up, and then they become healthy again. And whatever remediation needs to happen can potentially happen better that way.
How is the extraction of the CBD and the THC, and is it beneficial to have them together versus having them separate?
100%. There's over 150 cannabinoids in cannabis, maybe closer to 200 now, but we've studied about 150. THC and CBD are the major cannabinoids. They're the majors. All the other 148 are minor cannabinoids. Now, when you take a CBD product, like in a CBD store like this, it's going to be a full spectrum product. So it's going to have everything that the cannabis plant has in there, just not as much THC as you would get if you went to, say, a dispensary or somewhere.
And how do they do that?
Well, they're taking it from hemp plants. Hemp is kind of like the male, sort of, in a way, whereas the females that produce the bud is like the heavy THC producing plant. So when I was in the military in Kansas, and we'd go driving around, we weren't allowed to use cannabis, obviously, but there was hemp fields just like that, right there on that wall. And we along the golf course and out there in Kansas, and we'd go out there and they'd be 12 foot tall, and we would like strip off what we thought was something, but it wasn't. It's just little seed pods and leaves and stuff. That's the male plant. Well, they produce tons of CBD, but very little THC, 0.3 or less. Never gonna get you high. They use it for textiles. They use it for all that kind of stuff. I mean, hemp has been, that's a whole nother class about how long that's been going on. But nowadays, it's not the male hemp ditchweed anymore that's making the CBD. That's just kind of where it started. Now they've crossbred the genetics to have female plants that are producing buds that just produce high CBD, low THC. So, that being said, when you have a plant like that, it's going to be very, very high in CBG, CBC, CBN, THCV, THCVA, all these different cannabinoids that when they're all together, it makes the medicine that much better. You heard of it's called the entourage effect. Right now we're an entourage, we're stronger in numbers, right? But if I isolate myself, just CBD, just THC, just one cannabinoid, what can I do? It's when we're all together in a whole plant extract that it becomes a very efficacious medicine, for sure. And so CBD balances the THC's ability to overexcite the receptor like we were talking about. The people that do dabs, and I'm not using that as a bad thing. Dabs are great, some people need it for medicine, but you can abuse anything, water, exercise, etc. That's all I'm saying with that. But a lot of times with those extracts, it's 90% THC, right? That's the whole point of dabs is you want it to be 100% if you could. Well, what's gonna happen? You're gonna ingest and inhale that pure THC. It's gonna go in and hit all those receptor sites in your brain and overexcite them to where they're like, we don't like this, because there's no CBD there at all. The CBD comes in and it acts on the side of the receptor and it modulates it. It's like, hey, don't uptake that much, just uptake a little. And the CBD modulates everything. So that's why they're the majors. They're meant to be together. They have to
You're
be.
just making me think of like the uncomfortable highs of myself.
Uncomfortable. So let's talk about
Anxiety filled.
the negative side effects of THC. What are they? Rapid heart rate, paranoia, sweats. You think everyone knows, and you're like the most paranoid you've ever been in your entire life. You actually have an anxiety attack.
Like
We
someone's out
take
to
this-
get me.
Right.
Someone's gonna kill me.
They call
Like,
this
you
an
think some crazy
anti-anxiety,
things.
but it actually promotes anxiety. THC does. So if there's CBD with it, that's why a lot of times you want to look at a 1-to-1 product, 1 part CBD to 1 part THC. Like those gummies back there, 10 milligrams of THC, 10 milligrams of CBD. That right there will give you the most. That's the way the medicine is supposed to be. If you haven't tried it, I highly suggest you try one of those gummies back there. I'll give you one just to try it. Take it when you get home though. But you will notice that 10 milligrams of THC, it's not, I don't like that. It makes me feel sticky or something. But when there's CBD present, it's like the best thing you could ever do. It's a balance. We need the balance. So, yes, Wendy.
So just going back to this young man's question about getting too much, there are things I just haven't seen in the last few days on major news stations about the association of stroke, heart attack. It's a very, very small population, but I think it's fair to say that we're learning a lot of things from the pharmaceutical side, the effects it has with other prescribed drugs that are important for the older populations, which happens to be the largest demographic of new cannabis users in this, in states where it's legalized. And we do take a lot of calcium channel blockers. So Norvasc being one of the most popular prescribed, it's a high blood pressure medicine. So that's where these studies are coming from, and I don't mean to be a fear monger, but it is fair to, when we speak of cannabis in these circles, we don't mean for them to be a panacea. We are learning things still, and I think we need to, that's an important thing to tell people, 15 over.
Yeah.
And that, because it is all about the calcium channel. We absorb most medicines through calcium channel.
Blocks it or lets it in. Very good point. So.
And we get chronic hyperemesis syndrome.
Oh yeah.
From stimulating that people
So,
who do dabs.
yes, that's what happens.
Example.
The